We've all heard the stories, the axe, the guillotine to the firing squad, but behind the cold mechanics of death are trials that shake nations, verdicts that echo for centuries. There are cases where the line between justice and murder blurs completely, where a state kills not to punish a crime, but to silence a threat, to seize power, or to erase an idea. We are counting down 7 executions that Europe has never stopped arguing about. 7 names, 7 deaths, 7 controversies that are still raw, hundreds, even thousands of years later. If you value documented history that pulls no punches, subscribe to this channel. It is the single best way to support our deep dive research. Also, let us know in the comments which city you're hearing this story from. This script is not speculation. It is researched and factual, drawing directly from sources like the verbatim trial transcripts preserved in the Bibliothèque Nationale de France for cases like Joan of Arc, and the official, contemporary reports of Venetian ambassadors from the Archivio di Stato di Venezia, who served as Europe's eyes and ears in its most powerful courts. Now, back to the stories. Number 1, Socrates, 399 B. C. E. Athens, Greece. You are standing in the Agora, the heart of the world's first democracy. But this democracy is wounded, paranoid. It just lost a 27-year war with Sparta, the Peloponnesian War. It endured a brutal oligarchy, the 30 tyrants, and has only just restored its laws. It's looking for scapegoats, and it finds one in a 70-year-old man who walks barefoot and asks too many questions. His name is Socrates. His crime: officially, impiety and corrupting the youth. A politician named Anytus, a poet named Melodus, and an orator named Lycon bring the charges. They claim he's a dangerous influence, undermining the state gods and traditional Athenian values. The real crime is simpler. He makes powerful men look foolish. He exposes their ignorance in public. For that, he must be silenced. The trial is not held in a closed courtroom. It's before a jury of 501 of your fellow Athenian citizens, chosen by lot. Socrates doesn't beg. He doesn't plead. He defends his life's work, as recorded by his student Plato in the Apology. He argues that his questioning, his examined life, just is a service to the state, a divine mission to sting the lazy horse of Athens into action. He is defiant. The jury listens. Then they vote. The margin is narrow. 280 vote guilty, 221 vote not guilty. Under Athenian law, the accused can then propose an alternative punishment. The prosecution asks for death. A normal man would suggest exile. Socrates suggests he be rewarded. He proposes a fine of a mere 100 drachmae. Then, his wealthy friends, including Plato, convince him to raise it to 3,000, but his initial unserious suggestion is an insult to the court. He tells them he deserves free meals for life at the Prytaneum, an honor reserved for Olympic champions. The jury is enraged. On the second vote, the one that truly matters, life or death, the margin widens. 360 votes for death, only 141 for life. The verdict is final, but he doesn't die right away. A sacred ship had just set sail for the holy island of Delos, and during its annual voyage, no executions are permitted in Athens. For 30 days, Socrates is held in a state prison. His friends, like Crito, bribe the guards. They have a boat ready. They beg him to escape. It's all arranged. He refuses. To flee, he argues, would be to betray the laws of the very city he has spent his life questioning, but ultimately respecting. He chooses to obey. On the final day, his friends gather. A state official administers the poison, a cup of crushed hemlock. As Plato describes in the Phaedo, Socrates calmly drinks it, walks around until his legs grow heavy, then lies down. He feels the numbness spread from his feet upwards. Cold, wood, breath. His last words are to Crito: "We owe a rooster to Asclepius. Please, don't forget to pay the debt." Then he is gone. The foundation of Western philosophy begins with a state-sanctioned execution of its most famous thinker. Was he a martyr for free speech or a social irritant whose arrogance sealed his own fate? The argument never ended. Number 2. Anne Boleyn, May 19th, 1536. London, England. Power in Tudor England is not a game. It is a butcher's block. And the king, Henry VIII, needs a son. His first wife, Catherine of Aragon, could not give him one. So he broke with the Catholic Church, declared himself the head of the Church of England, and married Anne Boleyn. She is intelligent, ambitious, and pregnant, but she gives him a daughter, Elizabeth. 2 stillborn sons follow. The king's eye begins to wander to the quiet, gentle Jane Seymour. Anne's power, built entirely on the king's desire and the promise of a male heir, is crumbling. By April of 1536, The king's chief minister, Thomas Cromwell, has his orders: find a way to get rid of the queen. The plot is swift and brutal. The charge is high treason. The specifics are shocking: adultery with 5 men, including a court musician named Mark Smeaton, and incest with her own brother, George Boleyn. Smeaton is the weak link. He is a commoner, taken to Cromwell's house in Stepney and likely tortured. He confesses. The other 4 men, all aristocrats, deny the charges to the end. But Smeaton's confession is enough. The Queen is arrested on May 2nd and taken to the Tower of London, through the same gate she had entered in triumph for her coronation less than 3 years earlier. Her trial, and her brother's, takes place on May 15th in the King's Hall at the Tower. The jury is a panel of peers, presided over by her own uncle, the Duke of Norfolk. The evidence is non-existent. It is all rumor, innuendo, and one coerced confession. Found guilty, sentenced to die. Her brother and the other 4 men are beheaded on Tower Hill 2 days later. Anne is given a small mercy. The king, in a final gesture, agrees to spare her the clumsy horror of the executioner's axe, a tool for common criminals. He summons an expert swordsman from Saint-Omer, in France, a method of execution reserved for French nobility. On the morning of May 19th, she is not led out to the public scaffold on Tower Hill. Instead, she is executed in private on a specially built scaffold within the walls of the Tower of London, on what is now Tower Green. There are perhaps 1,000 witnesses. She gives a calm, careful speech, praising the king and urging the crowd to judge her charitably. She knows her daughter's life depends on it. She kneels, not at a block, but upright, in the French style. The swordsman, it is said, distracted her by calling for his sword, then struck her head from her body with a single, silent stroke. Her body is placed in an old arrow chest and buried in an unmarked grave in the chapel of St. Peter ad Vincula, within the tower. A Queen of England, disposed of like a secret. Was she a victim of a tyrant's lust, or a ruthless political player who simply lost the game? Her ghost, they say, still walks the tower. Her legacy is the daughter she left behind, Queen Elizabeth I, England's greatest monarch. Number 3, Giordano Bruno, February 17th. 1600, Rome, Italy. In the heart of the Catholic Counter-Reformation, ideas can kill. Giordano Bruno is a man of dangerous ideas. He is a philosopher, a former Dominican friar, a poet, and a man who has angered everyone. He has been excommunicated by Catholics in Italy, Calvinists in Switzerland, and Lutherans in Germany. His personality is abrasive, arrogant, and uncompromising, but his mind is brilliant. He looks at the stars and sees not the fixed, crystalline spheres of the Church's doctrine, but something terrifying and sublime, an infinite universe. He writes of countless suns, countless earths, all populated with their own life. In his book On the Infinite Universe and the Worlds, published in 1584, he argues that our world is just one of many, or a speck of dust in an endless cosmos. This is more than just astronomy. This is a direct challenge to the entire structure of Christian belief. If there are other worlds, are there other Adams, other Christs? The Roman Inquisition does not care about his science. It cares about his heresy. In 1592, he is lured back to Italy by a Venetian nobleman who promises patronage, then denounces him to the Inquisition. He is imprisoned in Venice for a year, then extradited to Rome in 1593. For the next 7 years, he is held in the dungeons of the Holy Office. He is interrogated, tried, and ordered to recant his heretical beliefs. And the list is long. He is accused of denying the divinity of Christ, the virginity of Mary, the doctrine of transubstantiation. His cosmology is part of the charge sheet, but it is the theological offenses that carry the death sentence. He offers to recant some minor points, but on his core philosophy, he refuses to yield. In January of 1600, he is declared an impenitent and obstinate heretic. Pope Clement VIII ratifies the verdict. On February 17th, he is taken to the Campo dei Fiori, the Field of Flowers, a public market in the center of Rome. His tongue is ordered to be tied, and a wooden gag, the mordacchia, is forced into his mouth, sometimes described as being spiked, to prevent him from making a final, defiant speech to the crowd. He is stripped, tied to a stake, and burned alive. The ashes of his body are thrown into the Tiber River. Nothing is to remain, but an idea, once spoken, cannot be unmade. For centuries, the Church tried to erase his memory, but in the 19th century, with Italy newly unified, he was reborn as a hero. In 1889, a statue was erected on the very spot where he was burned, a monument to free thought, defiantly facing the Vatican. The debate still rages. Was he a martyr for science? killed for his vision of the cosmos? Or was he a victim of his own theological heresies, a casualty of religious wars whose science was merely incidental to his execution? The Vatican going stau, after opening its archives on his case in 1998, insists the charges were religious, but in the Campo dei Fiori, Bruno's bronze gaze suggests another story. Number 4, Charles I of England, January 30th, 1649, London, England. Kings are not supposed to die like this. Their deaths are meant for the battlefield or the sickbed, surrounded by loyal subjects. But Charles Stuart is about to face a public executioner, condemned as a traitor by his own people. The English Civil War has been raging for 7 years. A brutal conflict between the forces of Parliament and the supporters of the king. Parliament, led by men like Oliver Cromwell and his disciplined New Model Army, has won. The king is their prisoner. But what do you do with a king? You cannot trust him. He has already escaped once and started a second civil war. They decide to do the unthinkable. They decide to put him on trial. In January of 1649, a special court is established, the High Court of Justice. The charge is revolutionary, high treason. The indictment accuses Charles Stuart, King of England, of being a tyrant, traitor, murderer, and public enemy to the good people of this nation. How can a king commit treason? In his worldview, the kingdom belongs to him by divine right. Treason is a crime against the king. The trial takes place in Westminster Hall. Charles refuses to recognize the court's authority. For 3 days, he refuses to enter a plea. I would know by what power I'm called hither, he demands. He sees the court as an illegal fiction, created by military force. The court sees his refusal as a confession of guilt. The verdict is a foregone conclusion. 59 of the judges sign the death warrant, a document that would become one of the most significant in English history. The execution is set for January 30th. The morning is bitterly cold. The king asks for a second shirt, a heavy one. He tells his attendant, "The season is so sharp as probably may make me shake," which some observers may imagine proceeds from fear. I would have no such imputation. He wants to die with dignity. A scaffold is built outside the banqueting house in Whitehall, a building filled with grand paintings celebrating the divine power of his own dynasty. He walks out onto the platform. The crowd is huge, but kept back by soldiers. He gives a short speech, but most cannot hear him. He places his head on the low block. The executioner is masked. One clean strike of the axe severs his head from his body. An eyewitness reports that an audible groan rose from the assembled crowd, a sound of shock and horror. England was now a republic, a commonwealth. The execution of Charles I shattered the sacred aura of monarchy forever. Was it the necessary, brutal birth of modern democracy and parliamentary rule, or an illegal act of regicide that plunged the nation into a decade of military dictatorship? The question haunted England through the Restoration and the Glorious Revolution, and its echoes still define the British relationship with its crown. Number 5, Louis XVI of France, January 21st, 1793, Paris, France. The French Revolution was born of hunger and ideas. By 1792, it had devoured its own creators and was turning on the man who symbolized the old world. The king, Louis XVI, once the absolute monarch of France, was now citizen Louis Capet, a prisoner of the revolution he had failed to control. His attempt to flee the country with his family in 1791, the flight to Varennes, had been a disaster. It exposed him as an enemy of the new France. When letters were discovered in the Tuileries Palace proving his secret correspondence with foreign powers, urging them to invade and crush the revolution, his fate was sealed. His trial began in December of 1792 before the National Convention, the revolutionary government itself acting as judge and jury. He was accused of 33 crimes, a long list of betrayals amounting to high treason against the French people. Louis, appearing in person, defended himself calmly but unconvincingly. The real debate was not about his guilt. Most agreed he was guilty, but about his punishment. The radical Jacobins, led by men like Robespierre and Saint-Just, demanded death. Louis must die so that the nation may live, Robespierre declared. The more moderate Girondins feared that executing the king would plunge France into endless war and chaos. The vote was a marathon, lasting over 24 hours. Each of the 749 deputies had to stand and declare his vote publicly. The final tally was terrifyingly close. For the death penalty without conditions, 361 votes against 360. Some historians argue the margin for an immediate, unconditional death sentence was as narrow as a single vote. The execution was scheduled for 4 days later. On the morning of January 21st, 1793, Louis was taken in a carriage through the streets of Paris to what was then called the Place de la Révolution. Today, it is the Place de la Concorde. A massive crowd had gathered around the new instrument of revolutionary justice, the guillotine. He mounted the scaffold. He tried to give a speech to the crowd, beginning, "I die innocent of all the crimes laid to my charge." But the commander of the National Guard, Antoine Joseph Santerre, ordered a drum roll. The noise drowned out the king's final words. He was strapped to the plank. The lunette, the curved wooden brace, was locked around his neck. The blade fell. The executioner, Charles-Henri Sanson, held up the severed head to the cheering crowd. 9 months later, his wife, Marie Antoinette, would follow him to the same fate on the same scaffold. Was this the ultimate act of popular justice, the necessary execution of a traitor to secure the birth of a republic? Or was it the moment the revolution abandoned its ideals of liberty and descended into the blood-soaked reign of terror? It is the central, defining argument of the French Revolution itself. If you are finding this journey through history's most contested moments valuable, take a second to subscribe. Your support fuels this channel and allows us to keep digging into these critical stories. And please, drop a comment below telling us where in the world you're watching from. Now, let's move forward into the 20th century, where the technology changes, but the motives remain the same. Number 6. Nicolae and Elena Ceausescu, December 25th, 1989, Târgoviște, Romania. This execution was not held in secret. It was filmed. It was broadcast. It was the brutal, televised end to one of Europe's most bizarre and repressive dictatorships. For 24 years, Nicolae Ceausescu had ruled Romania with an iron fist, creating a grotesque cult of personality around himself, the genius of the Carpathians, and his wife, Elena, the mother of the nation. He bulldozed historic parts of Bucharest to build massive monuments to himself, while his people starved, froze, and lived in terror of his secret police, the Securitate. But in the winter of 1989, the winds of change that had swept across the Eastern Bloc finally reached Romania. It began in mid-December with protests in the city of Timișoara. The Securitate opened fire, killing dozens. But this time, the people did not back down. The revolution spread. On December 21st, Ceausescu made his fatal mistake. He staged a mass rally in Bucharest to denounce the Timișoara protesters, broadcast live to the nation. For the first time, the choreographed chants of praise turned into boos and jeers. The shock on his face was visible. The broadcast was cut. The revolution had reached the capital. The next day, he and Elena fled by helicopter from the roof of the Central Committee building as crowds stormed it below. Their escape was short-lived. They were captured near the city of Târgoviște and held at a local army barracks as the country descended into chaotic street fighting between the armies, which had defected to the revolution, and loyal Securitate units, the newly formed National Salvation Front. Made up of former communist officials, knew they had to act fast. They feared the Ceausescus could be rescued or become a rallying point for loyalists. The solution was a trial, a quick one. On Christmas Day, a military tribunal was hastily assembled in a small room at the Târgoviște barracks. The trial was a farce, lasting less than an hour. The charges were vague and absurdly exaggerated, including genocide, with a claim of over 60,000 deaths. The real number of those killed in the revolution was closer to 1,100. The couple was defiant, refusing to recognize the court. The verdict was predetermined. Death. The sentence was to be carried out immediately. They were led outside into a courtyard and pushed against a wall. Nicolae began to sing the Internationale. Elena screamed at the soldiers. Before the camera crew could get into position, a captain named Ionel Buru and 2 other soldiers opened fire with their Kalashnikov rifles, firing over 100 rounds. The footage of their bodies, crumpled at the base of the wall, was shown on Romanian television that evening, and then to the world. Was it a necessary act of revolutionary justice to end a bloody tyranny, or was it a summary execution? A political murder carried out by their former colleagues to ensure the Ceausescus could never reveal the secrets of the new regime. To this day, Romania still argues about that Christmas Day in Târgoviște. Number 7. The Romanovs, July 17th, 1918, Yekaterinburg, Russia. There was no trial, no jury, no verdict. There was only a damp basement, a squad of executioners, and a secret the Soviet state would keep buried for over 70 years. In 1917, the Bolshevik Revolution had swept Tsar Nicholas II from power. He, his German-born wife, Alexandra, their 4 daughters, Olga, Tatiana, Maria, and Anastasia, and their chronically ill son, the heir Alexei, were now prisoners. Alongside them were their loyal family doctor, a valet, a maid, and a cook. By the summer of 1918, The Russian Civil War was raging. The family was held under guard in a merchant's house, commandeered by the Bolsheviks and renamed the House of Special Purpose, in the city of Yekaterinburg in the Ural Mountains. The anti-Bolshevik White Army was closing in. The local Ural Soviet AS, with direct approval from Lenin and his government in Moscow, made a decision. There could be no rescue. There could be no living symbol for the monarchist cause. The entire family had to be liquidated. Shortly after midnight on the night of July 16th, the family and their retainers were woken up. They were told there was unrest in the town and they needed to move to a safer location in the house for their own protection. They were led down to a small, semi-basement room. Chairs were brought for the Tsarina and Alexei. They waited for several minutes. Then, a dozen armed men filed into the room, led by the commandant, Yakov Yurovsky. He quickly read a statement. The Ural Soviet had sentenced them to death. The Tsar, stunned, turned to his family and managed to say, "What?" before Yurovsky and his men opened fire with a barrage of pistols. The room filled with smoke and screams. It was not a clean execution. The bullets ricocheted off the jewels, diamonds and pearls that the daughters had sewn into their corsets for safekeeping, turning their underclothes into makeshift armor. The killers had to finish the job with bayonets and close-range shots to the head. It took 20 minutes. The 11 bodies were loaded onto a truck and taken to a disused mineshaft in the Koptyaki forest. There, the killers attempted to destroy them with acid and fire before dumping them into the pit. The Soviet government publicly announced the execution of Nicholas II, but for 8 years, claimed his wife and children were safe in a secure location. It was a lie designed to confuse and demoralize their opponents. The House of Special Purpose itself was bulldozed in 1977 by Boris Yeltsin, then a local party boss, on orders from the Politburo, to prevent it from becoming a pilgrimage site for monarchists. The secret was buried under concrete, but it wasn't buried deep enough. In 1979, a local geologist and an amateur historian located the mass grave, but they kept their discovery secret until the collapse of the Soviet Union. In 1991, the grave was officially exhumed. It contained the remains of 9 people, the Tsar, the Tsarina, 3 of their daughters, and the 4 servants. The bodies of Alexei and Maria were missing, fueling decades of speculation. But in the summer of 2007, a second, smaller grave was found nearby, containing the burned bone fragments of 2 more bodies. Years of painstaking DNA analysis, using blood from the Duke of Edinburgh, a relative of the Tsarina, and other European royals, finally confirmed the truth. All 11 victims were accounted for. The execution of the Romanovs was not just regicide. It was a calculated act of political terror designed to wipe a dynasty from the face of the earth. It is a stark reminder that the deadliest verdicts are often those delivered in secret, in a basement, far from any court of law, and that even when a state uses all its power to bury a crime, the truth, eventually, finds its way out of the earth